When your skin texture looks like crap and you don't want to make a map, this tutorial is for you. It's not perfect, but it's Dirk approved pretty good. What's up, everybody? First of all, I want to shout out Henry. Thank you for leaving a comment in my last video suggesting that I do this one. And if you guys have any tutorial requests of your own, please leave a comment and let me know, and I might be able to do that for you. So first of all, I want to say this is not a 100% realistic skin shader. It's really hard to do with procedural textures. I believe it could be done, but nowadays if you want to get realistic skin, you really need to use some kind of advanced maps. And since they're kind of advanced is the reason I made this, I want to show you a way to achieve a pretty decent result without using any maps. This is 100% procedural. So first thing we're going to do is walk through each of the maps we're going to be making, just so that when we do actually make this node setup, you have a little better idea of what we're doing as we do it. So let's start with this first one here. And by the way, these are all rendered in 1080p. So if you guys want to go ahead and leave me the like and pop into full screen, you can see a little better what's actually going on here. So back to it. This first image here is the head model with nothing on it. It's just basically a principled shader with a color. Doesn't look very good. So the next thing we want to do is add subsurface scattering. And this is what that looks like. It's essential to creating any skin texture, whether you're using maps or not. And the problem with that, though, is that Blender starts you off with just a single color of the subsurface. So what we want to do is mimic what we'd find in real skin, which is there's some actual variation with, muscles and blood vessels and stuff like that. So we create this map here, and when applied, it looks like this. Very difficult to see again, but it does give you that slight variation in color under the surface that will eventually give you a little bit more realism. So the next thing we want to do is actually add some variation in the color on the surface of the skin itself. And we create this pore map here that starts to give us that. And this is what that looks like on the model. So the next thing we want to do is, when we created that pore map, it did give us some variation, but it's still pretty flat across the surface of the skin. So we create one more texture that looks like this, and that gives us that, extra variation. Variation, you can tell, is the key word here today. So we take those two maps, we mix them together, and we're left with kind of our final skin tone, basically. So this is what that looks like when it's all together. The next thing we do is add some bump mapping, and we do this by using the same texture we used earlier to create the pore color. So once this is applied, we have our bumps, and this is starting to really kind of come alive. So the last thing we do is use the pore texture one more time to create some variation in roughness. This is what that's going to look like, and that allows us to basically have less rough areas where the pores are, and it'll be a little shinier on the surface of the skin. So this is our final result. Stay tuned, and let's get started. Okay, so here's what we're going to be making. This is the node group. If you want to just copy it, feel free to pause the video here. If you do that, then please leave me a like. And also, you're not allowed to ask any questions in the comments. If you do ask a question in the comments, be sure that you write, "Derek, I hereby declare I watched the whole video and I still have a question." And that way I know. So if you do that, then I'll probably answer your question since you followed all the legal requirements and you're so nice. So anyways, let's get into making this. We are going to ditch everything we got here, everything we worked so hard for. I'm going to hit plus. I will say what we have over here is just a basic scene setup, got some lamps, and that's really all I'm going to say about that. So we have our new material here. What we're going to do is switch this to a principled shader, which is what I'm going to use in pretty much all my tutorials. And I'll say also I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on. You can enable that in the user preferences. Don't have to, but it helps a lot. So let's get started. the first thing I'm going to do is, just for the sake of getting started, I'm going to use just a random kind of color here just so we can see what we're doing. We are going to replace that though. So we got a orangish Donald Trump style skin over here, and we want to add subsurface. This is the first step. You're going to have to mess with these values depending on your model and stuff, but I found that 0.15 looked pretty good. And you can see now we have some light coming through, always most noticeable in thin areas on the human head, and ear is the place where you like to look. So now that that's taken care of, the subsurface color is what's influencing that under the surface color, subsurface color. So it's one color now, but like I mentioned, since your muscles and stuff like that are not just one flat color, we want to add a texture to create that variation. So I'm going to press Shift A, texture, and we're going to use a noise texture. And this is what we're going to be creating, this one right here. So if I Shift Control click like that, again using the Node Wrangler add-on, I can see what that texture is doing. It's a little bit too big, so I'm gonna scale it up. Big, small, I don't know. So we'll bring it to something like that. Again, this is a very subtle effect, so you can't really get this too wrong. And we don't want it to be this cotton candy crazy color, so I'm gonna use a color ramp to change that. And we're going to be using a few color ramps, so hopefully by the end of this you'll kind of have a pretty good understanding of how those work. So it took that cotton candy color and changed it to black and white. And the way the color ramp works is basically it allows you to, pick points along the color spectrum and change them, convert them to these other colors. So when I move these together, you can kind of see how it, crushes some of those whites and makes less variation, but I like the variation, something like that. And we don't want this to be black and white since we are going to use this subsurface color. So I'm going to change this white to this, and what I'm going to do is change this black to the same thing, just like that. And so it's the same now, which would have been the same we had, but what I want to do to create that variation is just take this this left side value, and it could be the right side either, it doesn't really matter. And I'm gonna increase the saturation so it's a little more red, and I'm gonna bring down the value of it. And now we're getting a fleshy demon type look. But what that works great for is our subsurface color. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug that in there. And again, very subtle effect, but it's there. If anyone asks you, well, is there subsurface variation? You can tell them that freaking, yeah, there is. So anyways, let's move on to the next part, which is going to be adding some variation to the skin color itself. So we're going to get rid of the old Donald Trump orange over here, and we're going to do another texture. And this one's going to be a Voronoi texture. I used to say, if I can find it, I used to say Voroni, but I think it's Voronoi. I don't know. It also doesn't really freaking matter. So anyways, let's take a look at what that looks like. That's what it looks like. It looks like he's got a big ass black head on his face. We don't want that. Maybe you do, but I don't. So I'm bringing this scale way up, something like 204 precisely. Just kidding. You're going to have to mess with that. But something like that looks pretty good. So Shift A, we're going to use another color ramp here because we're going to obviously be influencing the color. So that's under Converter, Color Ramp. And for this one, since this is actually going to be the skin tone, we want to go ahead and start playing with that. So I want to pick something skin tony here. And this is where you kind of just have to mess around. Let's change the value, make that kind of darker. And I want to make this the same hue. So I used the color picker when I was doing it up here, but if you just hover over the color and you press Control C, and then I'm going to select this one, this black, and hover over the color again and press Control V to paste, just regular commands. It pastes the color. Cool little tip for you. So this end is going to be my main color, and this end is going to be my pores. So on this end, I want to take this. Yeah, we use it's the same right now, so we've got the same hue, but I want to drag this value down And this is kind of gross actually. This is like going to be kind of like some blackheads. So that looks okay, but we want the pores to be a little more defined, and we don't want these huge blackhead things. So I'm going to add another point along that color ramp, and I'm going to bring that down, and that's going to make those blackhead shapes a little smaller. And for this color, let's just let's like bring the value saturation maybe up a little bit, something like that. You know, again, you got to just play with this stuff. So bring this down, and now you can see we're kind of getting some smaller details. The blackheads aren't quite as noticeable, and I think that looks pretty good. So when you look at this thing, oh, we need to plug that in there. When you look at this on the model, it's looking, you know, for one, it's hard to see because of the not too many samples going on over here, but it's still kind of flat. So we want to add this second texture here, which is going to give us some more variation. So I'm going to do that with a noise texture, and I'm just going to use the same one I used up here. But I'm gonna move the scale maybe down, up, I don't know, either way. Something like that looks good. Oh, that's 20 again. Wow. Let's pretend to have some variation here. Put that at 15. So that's our noise texture, and we want to use another color ramp to control that. So I'm just going to select this one, press Shift D, and I'm only really worried with 2 colors here, so I'm going to get rid of this middle point. And I could use the same colors here, but I think it looks good to kind of have some, once again, a variation. So I'm going to change the saturation of this, and I'm going to bring this hue a little more towards red. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Bring the hue a little more towards red. Bring that value down. Maybe not quite so saturated. This is actually pretty crazy right here. Let's bring that saturation. Okay, so that's looking kind of similar to what we had up there. So there's one texture, the pore texture, and here's the other one, which is going to be just adding that extra variation. And we want to mix those together to create this kind of final skin tone here. So I'm going to do a color mix RGB, as you may have guessed. And the way this works is it's just going to mix these 2 colors together. So right now it's mixing the first one with a gray, but we don't want that. We want to mix it with our pore texture. So once those are together, that's what we're working with. Looking pretty good. And the way this mix texture works is if it's all the way at 0, it's the first. If it's all the way at 1, it's the second. And if it's at 0.5, it's an even mix of both of them. You may wish to play with those values. I encourage you to do so, but I think it looks all right just at the default 0.5 even mix. So put that all back together. Oops, we need to drag this into here now. So now we have these 2 colors mixed together, influencing our base color, and that's giving us this. And it's looking pretty good. So now comes the fun part. We're going to add some bump to this. So to do that, like I mentioned, we want the bump to be where we have this pore texture. So I'm going to use this same texture to influence the height of the bump. So I'm going to press Shift A, vector, bump, drag this into the height like I mentioned, and drag this normal into the normal. And now we have bumpiness, but it's way too bumpy. So first of all, we're going to do this. I'm going to press Shift Control click again using the Node Wrangler add-on. And this allows us to, for one, render faster and see a little easier what we're working on. So you can see we've kind of got the blackheads showing up from this darker value here, but the rest of these this texture is colliding a little bit too much. So what I want to do is, first of all, let's bring down this strength so it's not so much. And now we can really see what's happened with the pores there. So it's a little bit, like I said, it's kind of colliding, and we don't want these peaks here. We want it to be a little bit flat. So I'm just going to use this and drag this down. Now this is going to influence your color a little bit, but since this is so slight and kind of hard to see, I'm really more interested in making the bump map more accurate. You could use a new color ramp, which I initially tried, and it does work a little bit better, but it's another color ramp. It makes it a little more complex, and we're going for simple, effective results here. Remember that. So there's the bump texture. It's looking pretty good. And it changed my pore texture a little bit, but really not too bad. I think it looks fine. So plug that all in together, looking pretty good. So the last thing we want to do is add some roughness variation. Once again, we want it to line up with these pores. We want the inner portions of the pores to be not so rough, or sorry, we want those to be rough, and we want the upper level of the skin outside the pores to be a little bit shinier. So we are going to use the same color ramp, and we're going to plug that into the roughness. If you plug it straight in there though, it's a little hard to see what's going on. You can already see it's too shiny here. And the way roughness works is 0 to 1. So black and white is the easiest thing to work with. 0 being black, 1 being white, 1 being very rough, 0 being not very rough. So in order to better see what we're doing, we are going to use one more color ramp. So I'm going to press Shift A, Converter Color Ramp, drag that in there, and now we can see what's really happening. And when you do that, you'll notice it's the wrong direction. So with this, with the pores being dark, that means they're closer to 0, which means they're closer to no rough, which is the opposite of what we want. So I'm going to hit this little flipper thing, and it's gonna invert it. So now it's a little hard to see, probably even harder on your screen, that we've got where the pores are is a white. So, and this just lines up right over here. So white is all the way over here. And what I'm going to do is just bring this black kind of down a little bit. And so, you know, if we went all the way down like that, then this is, you know, white, which is not rough, or sorry, which is rough, and the black, which is not rough. And if we do that, you can see now it's super shiny where the black is. So we don't want that. So we're gonna move this up until we kind of have a gray value. And once we have that gray, we're just gonna have to kind of guess and check here. So, wow, I'm a pretty damn good guesser. Look at that. So, you know, you have to play with that. You know, you may want different effects based on what you're going for. If you want some oily skin, you know, bring it way down. But I think that looks pretty good right there. You know, maybe bring it a little bit down. That's so shiny. And what do we got here? I think we got it all. That's it, guys. I hope you liked it. I again want to mention this is not a super realistic shader. You know, obviously your eyelids aren't going to have these crazy pores like this, but this covers the majority of the face and is a good balance between something that's relatively simple but also has a somewhat effective result. So if you guys like this, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos. Put a fair amount of time into this one, so it'd be really great if you guys shared it around, and hopefully more people can see what we did here and learn some stuff along the way. And I hope you guys also took this just as an opportunity to learn about kind of how procedural texturing works, and that it's really fun to kind of, you know, approach a problem like creating a realistic skin and playing around with these values and coming up with something in a creative way that will bring you to your result. So I hope you guys liked it. One more time, feel free to like the video, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.